Pansa, nós seguimos com outro episódio de Self-Made. Hoje nós temos guest internacional, pero para você e a outra semana nós também temos guest local back. Pero já que guest internacional, sei que o episódio aqui vai ter em inglês, dus met de switch de viaja. Today we're going to have Hutchison, the co-founder of BookThinkers, one of the guys that I follow on a day-to-day basis, and one of the people that helped me get into reading and pick all the books that I'm going to read next. So to tell you a bit about Hutchison, as I said, co-founder of BookThinkers. BookThinkers is an online nonfiction book community where he speaks about books, reviews books, give you some insights and recommendations, and it's a community of over 100,000 followers on Instagram. So Nick, welcome to the show, man. I'm glad I could get you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very excited for our conversation today.
So am I, man. I know that you've been to Aruba on vacation before, so I'll still let you briefly introduce yourself to the Arubans here.
Sure. So like you said, my name is Hutchison. I'm 27 years old. I'm the co-founder of BookThinkers, a company dedicated to helping people out here in this world discover new personal development books. And I went through a radical transformation in my life where some of these books, they just had such a positive impact on me, and I want to share it with the world. And so I have been to Aruba before. I spent about a week vacation, and I absolutely loved the island. I had nothing but a fantastic experience, and I can't wait to come back.
Nice, man. One thing that I find very interesting about your story, and we're going to head into it soon, is that you loved reading, but at first you didn't, just like me. But then you still managed to monetize what you love doing and sort of make a living out of it. So that's the best part. But let's just hold that off a bit to the mid part. I just want to hear about the Nick before books a bit. Tell me about you.
Sure. So I grew up in the Boston, Massachusetts area. I know a lot of people from Boston spend a lot of time in Aruba. And growing up in Boston was great. Cold in the winters, warm in the summers. I loved playing sports. That was the thing that I was most passionate about when I was younger. So I played football, American football, when I was growing up in high school, and I also wrestled. I was captain of the wrestling team. My football team was also pretty good. We actually played in Gillette Stadium where the New England Patriots play in our Super Bowl. I had a white picket fence style family, grew up in a Catholic household. My parents were amazing. I have 3 younger brothers. All 4 of us are pretty close in age. So the 4 of us plus my dad, we equal a basketball team. And yeah, I had a great childhood. I then went to the University of New Hampshire, which is a little bit north of Boston. And I got a degree in business administration with a focus in marketing. I also got a minor in public speaking and technical writing. And that was because at the time I had a ton of social anxiety. I was a terrible speaker. My language was filled with verbal pauses, and it was pretty embarrassing. And I knew I wanted to get a career somewhere in the business world, and I needed to learn how to speak and pronounce words more efficiently. And so that's why I ended up with a degree in marketing and public speaking. And so that's really Nick before BookThinkers. And then after college, I entered the professional world and really started BookThinkers. So that's kind of the story before that.
So then what was your story when you started to get into books in the first place? What was that like?
I took an internship my senior year at the University of New Hampshire with a software company. And the story about finding that internship was pretty funny. I actually went to a career fair. And at the career fair, all of these different companies based in New Hampshire and Massachusetts set up different booths. And one of my friends was talking to this software company, and I was standing off to the side, and I struck up conversation with a gentleman who was also just sort of looking at the booth. And he asked me a couple of questions about what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to get into sales. And he said, well, I actually own that company over there. I'm just sort of watching my employees to see how they're interacting with everybody. And I'd like to hire you. We don't have a sales department or a business development department really that's built out, but I'd like to start it with you. And you can do whatever the business as long as it helps generate some sales. And so I said, wow, this is a pretty cool opportunity. So I took the opportunity, and very early on, one of the mentors at that position said, look, if you're distanced in the classroom, if you're not getting a lot of information from the classroom, you're not applying things, you're uninterested, why don't you try some of these books? He recommended a couple. And the thing that really got to me was he said, it's accelerated learning. You can condense decades of information, decades of experience into days of application. It might take you 3 or 4 days to read a 200-page book, and you'll learn all of the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs, the lessons from these great authors, and you can apply them directly into your life. So it's much faster in a college classroom. And that was really interesting to me. And so that's how the journey really started. It was through that internship. That's how I got the internship. And that's how I was introduced to personal development books.
So then your first read, what was it?
It was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I know that that's a first read for a lot of people. And that book changed my life. I had a lot of financial insecurities at the time. I was in business school, but I didn't really know a lot about money. See, in that book, Robert teaches us that the subject of money is normally not taught in school, meaning we're not all on a level playing field. It's normally taught in the home. And so if you grow up in a poor or middle class family, you're going to learn poor class money habits. But if you grow up in a rich family, that's the good life, because you're going to learn rich money habits. There are other ways to adopt a new financial perspective too. You can learn the tools of the trade through a good book, or like a good mentor, or through a good mentor like Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I read the book, and instantly after just one book, I knew more than pretty much everybody else in business school did, which is pretty ironic. And so it cured a lot of my financial anxieties. It also gave me tools to take advantage of my financial situation in the world. And so after reading the book, I thought, man, I need to get a lot more of this. And what other areas of my life can I apply this to? It was like magic.
So then since you started reading, how often do you read, let's say, every day?
I do read every day, and on weekdays, typically for about an hour a day. On weekends, it could be either no reading if I'm having fun and traveling the world, or it could be a ton of reading if I'm at home or in the mood while I'm traveling. It could be 4, 5, 6 hours a day on the weekends. And that does fluctuate depending on workload and things like that, but I try to read as much as humanly possible. And a common question that people ask is, well, hey, I'm so busy, I can't find any time to read. And so my suggestion for that is replace existing activities. The 80-20 principle. About 80% of your activity is only generating 20% of the results on a day-to-day basis. And so that's low impact activity. It's not generating that much as far as a return. And so replace those things with reading. Maybe that's Netflix, maybe it's social media time, but you can always create more time simply by replacing low impact activity with reading. And that's sort of what I've done. I got rid of a lot of the personal social media. I don't watch Netflix. I spend a lot of my time. I used to spend going out and having fun, and now spend that time reading.
So then I know that just like me, you weren't always a reader, right? Back then you used to hate books even. Was that back in your high school days, or was it college days?
It was definitely all of my high school days and most of my college days. And so, yeah, I don't know what happened. I think I just kind of personified a little bit of that jock stereotype that you have in the US of the football player, wrestler. Didn't for academics. I didn't put a lot of value on it. And it wasn't the fault of my parents. My parents put a lot of emphasis on school and education. I just decided, like a lot of young people do, to rebel against that. And I found more acceptance and I found more comfort in the stereotype than I did the intellectual at the time. And so, yeah, I never read a book. In middle school and high school, when we were assigned book assignments, I would do everything possible not to read the book. I would research it online, I'd look at Spark Notes and all of these different websites. I'd look for book summaries. I'd try to, have my friends send me their notes, like whatever I could do. And I used to have this, I also have a big insecurity about reading just because I never really developed the skill, especially out loud. And so if you could picture that classroom setting where everybody's in a circle and everybody has to read a paragraph after a paragraph after a paragraph, I would having to do that in front of people. I'd excuse myself and go to the bathroom, or I would read ahead. I'd count ahead. Okay, I'm the 10th paragraph. Let me go try to recite this 5 times before it gets to me. Like, that's how much social anxiety I had around reading. So I think some of that also contributed to my dislike of reading back in the day.
I know exactly what you mean, because I used to do that same thing too, where you used to count, everyone that has to read before you, just so you can rehearse it a bit before it's your turn. And back in high school even, so just like you, there was this time this year that we had to read between 9 and 12 books, right? So I would search everything on Spark Notes, study the summaries and everything, instead of just reading the book, right? I preferred studying the bullet points and summaries just so I can pass the exams. Like, as a matter of fact, this set right now is made up of my high school books that I never read. So I just sacrificed them and cover this table in the back. But I'm interested to know one thing. So when I read my first self-improvement book, it was Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort, right? Because I also wanted to go into sales. My first year of college was also a BBA, so business administration. Right now, I'm also taking a turn to marketing, so a bit similar to you as well. And then I read that book because I love the movie so much, Wolf of Wall Street, that I wanted to learn how to speak or sell just like Jordan, right? So that was my first book. But since I was never a reader, it took me like literally maybe 2 months, 2.5 months just to finish that one because I was so slow and it was so hard to just keep going and not get distracted. So for you, as you got into reading, how did you get better? Did you also take long just like me?
No, I didn't. And there were a couple different variables that influenced this. So when I took that internship, it was between my junior and senior year at college or at university is when I started.
Okay.
And so it was a full-time internship, 40, 50 hours a week. But when I showed up sort of on week one and my mentor at the time recommended a couple of these books, I didn't have a lot of responsibilities at that job. And so I thought, I want to use this time in a productive way. I have a little bit of anxiety about post-college. I want to get a job. Maybe this will be a good fit. So I wanted to be productive time instead of just sit on my phone. But I didn't have a lot of responsibilities on a day-to-day basis. So I read a lot. I spent a lot of time reading and taking notes. And so I went through those first couple books pretty fast. Now I've absolutely progressed. I've become more efficient at reading in a lot of different ways. But I did go through those first couple books pretty fast. So it was funny. I went from no reading to a lot of reading very fast.
Gotcha. One thing that I want to ask you is, it's like a popular opinion, or I've even heard this back from like lecturers at the university when I asked them for advice on reading. They told me that, or one of them in particular told me that reading self-help books is pure BS in his opinion because he prefers just going out there and gaining the experience, right? That's what he said. And then also, they say that once you start reading more and more self-help books, it just all sounds the same. So it's like you're getting more of the same information. Now, I've read tens of, self-help books, but you've read in the hundreds, so you're way more than me. So what's it like for you? What's the difference between having read tens and having read hundreds? Like comparing yourself to
Sure.
back then.
I have a couple different opinions on this, and
Yeah.
rein me in if I start to get a little bit scattered. So as far as self-help in general, I think there's a very simple question, and it's a comparison. And we'll use sales in Way of the Wolf, Jordan Belfort, as an example. So there's two versions of you. There's the version of you in 2021 that takes a sales job with no sales experience and has never read a sales book. And you go and you perform that job for 12 months. And there's a result at the end of the year. There's a second version of you, an alter ego, who decides, I'll go read one sales book per month and apply these lessons. See what happens. And so you read 12 sales books from the world's best salespeople and you apply everything that they have to teach you. At the end of the year, which one wins? It's probably the one with the sales books. And so that same comparison can be done in virtually any area of life. There's so much to be learned from the world's best and most efficient people. And so the version of you that reads these books and applies these lessons will always beat the version of you that does not. And so that simple comparison shines a new light. Question: is personal development and self-help a BS industry or not? Now, there is a weird thing that happens with people sometimes where they do get a dopamine hit or they get pleasure simply from reading the books and visualizing themselves in the future rather than actually taking action on what they've learned. And so that's where it can get a little unhealthy. A lot of these books are written in a way to, like, they do give you a sense of achievement as you're reading them. And so that's not healthy. You do need to apply these things. Real behavior change is always the goal of personal development. You need to apply as much as possible. Otherwise, it's just like playing video games. I mean, you're having fun, you're playing in this fantasy world, but nothing in your real life is actually changing. So that's where it can get a little bit of unhealthy, or it can get into the realm of healthy. So the difference, your other question was the difference between tens of books and hundreds of books.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in your subconscious and letting your subconscious act on your behalf. And so when you study a subject and you go very, very deep, meaning maybe you read 20 or 30 books on a single subject, you're strengthening those neural pathways in a way that cannot be done after just reading a couple books. And so the way that your brain works is like a situation will pop up and you'll default to whatever the strongest neural pathway is in your brain. And so maybe it's a sales opportunity, you'll default to whatever kind of like basic negotiation skills you have if you go to negotiate. Whereas if you read 20 or 30 books on negotiation, you're kind of digging that trenchway in your brain, or digging that trench in your brain. You're strengthening that relationship to the information you've learned over and over and over. It happens through repetition. And so all of a sudden you'll default after reading 20 or 30 books to this wealth of information, this stored place in your brain where you have all the information on negotiation, and you'll be able to then take advantage and execute on it. So I'm not a big fan of book summaries just because I think it's a shortcut. I don't think spending enough time digging those trenches in your brain, you're not strengthening the relationship enough to the information. And plus, although there are a lot of similar books on a lot of similar subjects, there's always different cases and examples that your brain will attach itself to. So I don't ever think it's a waste of time to read a ton of books on one subject. I'm always a fan of doing that.
Same. Like even as you said, if you want to remember things, or let's say tattoo these facts into your mind, the best thing is to repeat. And I'd prefer to repeat the knowledge from different opinions and perspectives than just from the same one, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, repetition leads to retention. And that's a very simple thing to remember. Repetition leads to retention.
Another question that we have, because I just mixed in my questions that were a lot with like some Instagram questions. So one of them is, especially when you were starting out, how did you pick your next book that you wanted to read?
There's two basic ways that I used to do this. Number one was I would pick books that excited me. So who did I want to be like? Who were the people that I looked up to and wanted to learn more about? Autobiographies and biographies are sort of entertaining. They're almost like movies in a way. So a hybrid between being a non-reader and being a reader, kind of like biographies and autobiographies sit right in the middle for me. So if I want to learn about entrepreneurship, I might look at somebody like Steve Jobs and I say, okay, Apple is one of the biggest companies on the planet. Let me see what popular biographies written about Steve Jobs. And so I would really get into books like that at the beginning because they would just flow. You know, you could visualize everything happening in your mind just like a movie. And the movie's written about a lot or made about a lot of these people. And so that's one method. I would choose books based on people I wanted to be like or learn more about. And you also become smarter when you can quote people, Einstein or Da Vinci or some of the old, ancient philosophers, the Senecas and Marcus Aureliuses of the world. So read books about those people. You become smarter. It's almost like a movie. They're easier to read. And then you develop the habit of reading through doing that. The other thing is visualize the end of this year, right? It's January 2021. Who do I want to be walking out of this year? And then bridge the gap. What's the difference between me and that person? Okay, maybe I want to be a better salesman by the end of the year. So I can pick out specific books related to that skill set. And now I'm motivated by this future version of myself. And so it's easier to get through those books. They're immediate needs. There may be pain feel in your life. And so you say, I need to be a better sales guy. I'm going to read Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort. Going to implement some of these things. And you'll be more motivated to do it, just like you were with your first book and just like I was with my first book.
Exactly. I do it pretty similarly as well. So I just see who I look up to and why, in what areas. And I just try to gain the knowledge from those authors or people that have written about these people, my bad. So I could keep leveling up in all the fields to be good in what I want to be good in. Because maybe, again, some people are just not interested in reading books about marketing or sales because they don't want to go in that direction. That's fine. But for me, sales books were some of the best. Even Jordan Belfort's book, I went through it 3 times already. Besides that, I know that you're also a Stoicism enthusiast, just like me. So tell me a bit about that, because I know you like Ryan Holiday, just like me. Go ahead.
Sure. I was introduced to Stoicism in a few different ways. I mean, on one side of the spectrum, I had heard about Marcus Aurelius. He was this great philosopher, and he's one of those pillars of history that you just want to know more about, because if it comes up in conversation, you want to contribute, especially with intellectual people. Yeah. And so I purchased a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which was his journal. It was his personal journal, never intended to be commercially distributed, but thankfully it was, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And so I took a stab at reading that. I heard about Stoicism, but I had a very difficult time reading it. I didn't get all the way through it. I actually only got a couple pages in before I gave up. The language was too difficult for me at the time, and I didn't understand where a lot of the concepts were coming from. Then my friend Alec gifted me a copy of a book called The Daily Stoic, which is written by Ryan Holiday and co-authored by a guy named Stephen Hanselman.
Yeah.
And The Daily Stoic is very simple. So each and every day, there's a short paragraph that comes from your Stoic philosopher like Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or Epictetus, and it's a direct quote from one of their works of literature. Then the authors go on and expand just for a simple page, a couple more paragraphs, and they'll relate it to modern day life. They might ask you a couple thought-provoking questions. And so each and every day I read that book. It became part of my morning routine. After a couple months, I started to have all of this new perspective, and I had a foundation of what Stoic philosophy really means. I spent a lot of time reflecting on those lessons. And then I was introduced to a lot of Ryan's other work. I read some other Stoic philosophers, and now I'm just with the Stoics and their philosophies. The thing that makes them different and unique is that it's an application-based philosophy. It's not meant to just be argued about in theoretical situations on the front steps of like this Roman Colosseum or something.
100%.
It's meant to be tried in your daily life, and you're supposed to implement these different virtues and philosophies and see what happens and see how you feel. And it's definitely rooted in application, which I really enjoy.
So after reading The Daily Stoic, which is like one of Ryan's books that you like the most, I guess?
The three that you have in front of you, actually. So ego is the enemy, obstacle is the way, and stillness is the key. All three of those books are fantastic. Ryan also wrote a new book called Lives of the Stoics, which came out in 2020. And I had Ryan on my podcast to talk about it. We had a cool conversation. He's one of those people that I look up to because he's just a great writer. You know, he's written about sales and marketing and conspiracy, the areas that he would write about prior to Stoic philosophy. And now he writes a lot about philosophy. Funny thing about Ryan, too, is that he's actually written some of the other famous personal development books that we look at in the industry. He writes on behalf of other authors as a ghostwriter. So he's
Really?
definitely a big believer in personal development. Yeah.
That's crazy. I also read Lives of the Stoics, which was, it was great. Just like you, when I went into meditations for the first time, I couldn't finish it because it was like just the words that were being used were like difficult, and it was a bit weird to get into. But then I started with Ryan's work, and that made me appreciate and start to apply Stoic principles every day. And then once I did that, going back to meditations was just easier, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Funny enough, I have gone back to meditations a couple times, but I haven't read the book one time through, so I'll need to do that.
Same. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
One other question that we got was, I also heard you talk about this in another podcast, is people would like to know how to increase their reading speed while still not decreasing the retention that they get from reading the book.
I've had a couple guests on our podcast, including Jim Quick and Howard Berg, two people that teach speed reading courses, and I've gone through their books. I've never taken a course, but some very simple things that you could do is when you grab a book, you can follow along with a pen, and it'll keep your eye focused on the line. You won't ever lose your place in the book. Another thing that I do to increase speed, which sounds really funny, is you need to have the correct posture. If you're looking down and your neck you're not looking at the book at the ideal angle. You want to be kind of like focused on the book. You want it to be right in front of you. And so I read, funny enough, a lot of times like with the book out in front of me along with the page. I try to decrease my sub-vocalization, meaning I try not to read every single word in my brain out loud. And this takes a lot of practice, but if you can stop sub-vocalizing, your brain still retains the information, and you can read like 4 or 5 times faster without sub-vocalizing because you can only speak at a certain level of words per minute. And if you try to replicate that in your brain, it's the same as your verbal words per minute. So if you just quit the sub-vocalization, you could read a lot faster too.
So then what is one thing that you do when, say you're reading and you're going pretty fast, right? So just like you said, and then you just hit this like key sentence or quote that you just know you want to retain. Do you like stop and go over it a few more times, or do you just keep going?
No, I do stop and go over it a few times. I also I love kind of ripping apart books. So I highlight, I
Yeah, me too.
circle, I write notes in the margins. And then whenever I finish a book, I go back. Now that I have the entire context, I have the whole picture of the book, I have all of the lessons and what they're supposed to mean because I just read it. I go back and I look for up to my top 10 takeaways. And so by rewriting my top 10 takeaways physically on paper or with a keyboard into my computer and then systematically reviewing them, now I'm really retaining them. Again, repetition leads to retention. And so that's what I'll do. I don't always stop and reflect while I'm reading. Sometimes I just bracket it off and keep going, and then I reflect after I'm done. It depends on really what the goal is for the book and if I feel like I have a timeline or if I'm just leisurely reading.
So then let's say you just keep doing what you just said. So you write down like your top 10 takeaways of every book. But then what's it like when you've read hundreds, right? So do you keep going to all those top 10 takeaways of all the hundreds of books, or what do you do to keep retaining it?
There's sort of an ideal situation, which is systematic retention with like diminishing frequency. And so the idea is that up front, right when you finish a book, it's fresh in your brain. You review it a couple times, right when it's fresh. And then you can kind of decrease the frequency in which you review. After a couple months, now you're only reviewing once every couple of months. After a year, you're reviewing once or twice a year. And so that's kind of the ideal situation. And we've tried to build some technology in the past that would help replicate or automate that process for a reader. Hasn't been super successful for us yet, but we're in the middle of taking another shot at it now. So stay tuned. What I do now is it's really topical or it's like related to what I need in life. And so I have all of my notes from every sales book or negotiation book or marketing book. And so if I'm presented with a problem like BookThinkers as a business needs me to focus on one of those areas, I can go back and systematically review my biggest takeaways from those books. And so that's kind of the system that I default to now. I just do it on a need to read basis.
Now, let's say one question that we got a lot of and that I could relate to more back then is, say you're reading a book or you choose a book because you've read that it's very knowledgeable, right? So let's say you pick Think and Grow Rich because everyone says it's a must-read classic, and then you're having some trouble getting through it because you think it's either boring or it's not like written in a way that's fun to read. What would you do in that case?
When I first started reading, I would make myself go through the book because I had this philosophy, and I don't know where it came from, but I had this philosophy that the golden nugget, right? The thing that could change your life, the thing that everybody raves about might be on the very last page. And it might not make any sense to you unless you read every single page leading up to it. And so that was my philosophy early on was read every single page, even if you hate the book. Then I heard Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss talk on a podcast, and Ryan mentioned something called the rule of 100. And so he says, take the number 100 and subtract your age. That's how you need to read. And I thought, okay, this is a pretty interesting philosophy because the older you get, the less you have to read because you've become wiser and more knowledgeable to determine whether or not it's a good book. And so if you're 20 years old, you need to read 80 pages, but if you're years old, you only need to read 50 pages before you can make that decision. And the reason that they have that rule in place is because they don't want to read bad books. There's only so much time on this planet.
Yeah, exactly.
And so those guys have a couple other rules too. Like they won't read any books that are written in the current year or the previous year because they want it to go through as many hands as possible. They want the concepts to sort of stand the test of time. That's why you've got guys like Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss and Robert Greene. They only read books from ancient people most of the time because those books they've stood the test of time over the course of hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years. So those are a couple different ways that you could look at, do you put down a bad book or do you keep reading it?
That's a great one because sometimes you struggle. Like I have books back here that I know where I was expecting that I was going to learn stuff from it, but sometimes it just gets so dry and I just wonder if I should just muscle through or just pick up the next one, right? But just like you said, I used to see it in the way that even if a book's not that great, there might be 2-3 pages that have like that one golden nugget that might be perfect for me and I don't want to miss out, so I'll just muscle through. But then, yeah, as you said, I also started to change that a bit. So if I get, again, let's say a quarter way through the book and I'm not liking it, I might just put it down and then prioritize another read and maybe come back to it, some other time.
Sure. And there's an important question to ask yourself when you can't get through a book or it becomes uninteresting to you. Why can't you get through the book? Because you might find that it was offensive to you and that you need to open up your perspective a little bit. You might find that it was boring because you don't understand certain terminology. And so by understanding that terminology, kind of like meditations, right? I didn't understand a lot of the roots of Stoic philosophy. And so it was really tough to read that book. But now that I go back with a better foundation, it's easier to read through. So it could be too technical. There are a lot of different reasons why a book might not be a good fit for you. And there are also many books that I've read three, four, five, six times, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's funny because the lessons change over time based on what I want to be reading. Sort of you read through a lens of sort of what you're expecting to learn from the book. And so sometimes that book is a real estate book. Sometimes it's a self-help book. Sometimes it's anything in between. And yeah, it depends on the perspective and kind of the brain that goes into reading the book.
Now, would you mind if I ask you a few questions about your Instagram page? Because although you're the book guy, I still think there's a knowledge to get out from there. So I know that BookThinkers on Instagram, you've been at it for 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you managed to grow it to over 100K followers completely organically. So from the beginning, did you have like a strategy that you implemented to reach this point of growth or no?
Well, prior to pressing film, I know we were talking a little bit about Gary Vee. And Gary Vaynerchuk was my original social media mentor. It was a passionship. I have met Gary, but I don't know Gary. He put out this video one day that was called a $1.80 strategy. And the idea is that you need to go out into your community, into your potential target followers, and you need to interact with them every single day. So that's what I did. That's how BookThinkers started. That's where all of our original momentum came from. I would search a hashtag related to my target followers. So it could be personal development book, it could Way of the Wolf, it could be Jordan Belfort, whatever the case was. And I would go look at the trending posts. Two things would happen. Number one, I could see what was popular and what worked in my industry. So I could kind of model or replicate a lot of that kind of content style. The thing was I would go into those posts and I would look at the types of people that were commenting on them. Now I would leave a comment or respond to a bunch of comments, and that would give them a genuine notification. It didn't say, hey, follow me, but it said, hey, I really enjoyed this book too. Here are my 2 cents. And by providing 2 cents on 90 posts per day, you're leaving $1.80 worth of, output into the world. And so that's where the $1.80 strategy comes from. Interact with 90 posts per day, and you're giving 90 or potentially a lot more people, but at least 90 people a notification, and that notification could potentially lead them to your profile. And if your profile looks good, they might follow you and become part of your network. That is where all of the original followers came from. And it took a long time and a lot of work behind the keyboard, and learning and observing and interacting, engaging before we really had any traction. And so that was really important to me. And I'll just mention one more thing. It also comes from Gary Vee. I read his book, Crush It, came out before Crushing It. Book might be 10 years old now. And in Crush It, he talks about the importance of an audience of one, or the value of an audience of one. He says if you lean too hard into the analytics, you might get depressed when you see bigger pages or pages in your industry have a lot more traction than you. And maybe you've been at it for 6 months and you don't really feel like you're going anywhere. But as long as you have one person, one follower that engages with you maybe on a weekly basis or on at least 10% of your content, one person that cares about what you're doing and sends you a DM every once in a while and interacts with you, that's all that matters, right? That's all that matters, because that one person will introduce you to more people. That person could be the key to turning your social media brand into a real business. And you don't know when it's going to happen, kind of like that golden nugget. It could be at the very end of the book. It could be after your 100th post. It could be after 6 months. It could be after a year. But eventually, the compound effect takes hold. Small steps in the right direction over a long period of time will lead to a disproportion. It just takes a long time. And so those were some of the early days of the books and the strategies that I used to grow the show.
So was it like slow growth at first and then it just boomed, or how was it?
Yeah, it was very, very, very slow growth. I would say for, a few months, and then I hit 1,000 followers, and then it ramped up a little bit, but stayed pretty consistent until I hit 10,000 followers. 10,000 followers on the BookThinkers page was when I really saw things started off. And I don't know what's magical about that number, but when somebody visits your profile, what is the percentage of likelihood that they're going to follow you? There are a couple different variables that impact that percentage or that likelihood. One thing that happens is birds of a feather flock. The larger your community becomes, the more likely a potential follower is going to follow you.
Yeah.
And it seems like 10,000 and then again at 100,000, those are numbers that really increase that likelihood. So, you're just browsing at book pages and you happen to follow, or you happen to find BookThinkers because of hashtags, or I commented on your post, or whatever the case is. If I'm at 9,000 followers, maybe there's a 30% chance you're going to follow me. At 10,000, all the way, for reason, all of a sudden it goes up to 40%. Okay, but at 100,000, maybe it goes up to 50%. At 1 million, it goes up to 75%. And so that number in your audience really does matter. And so I think those were some of my tipping points. 10,000 was a very clear one for me.
That's great, man. For me, Gary Vee was also a mentor since I started this page. So at that point when I started, I haven't read a marketing book yet or taken any courses, anything like that. But I just saw what he was doing and listening to what he was saying, right? And then I just got the idea of what to do. So even the short clips that you release, to just make sure that for the people's short attention spans, you can still make some content. And then putting your face out there instead of just text written on the plain edit, right? And then just for you, for you it was the 180 rule. For me it was the jab, jab, right hook, right? So I was making sure that I'm just giving people value before I even ask for a follow, for a like, for steps to participate in a giveaway. I'm just making sure that I'm giving away free value with every single post, So things like that we both learned from Gary Vee, which is another tip. He's someone you can follow if you just want to start a social media community, channel, whatever. But it's cool that you learned from him too. Because you're at 100K now. I plan to be there soon, hopefully. So I'll just follow the steps.
Yeah, just follow the steps. And you mentioned a couple other things that I definitely took advantage of too. And I won't ramble about them, but documenting instead of trying to create takes a lot of the pressure off. And that's something that Gary preaches, and it's something that he lives every day. Gary has a camera team that follows him around, and they just simply document what he's doing, the conversations he's having. And if he has an insight, he turns and he looks at the camera. And that's really important because a lot of people get psyched out when they start a community or a page or a network, and they think, geez, it's so hard to create content. Don't create content. Just document what you're already doing and people will find it interesting. Gary, I watched him in a video recently. He said to a fan who asked him a question, listen, you don't need to think you're interesting. Other people just need to think, and they probably already do. So don't psych yourself out. Don't try to create content. Just document what you're already doing. And I was reading and I was finishing books. So instead of trying to read for the community, I was just showing what I was reading, and it seemed to work really well.
Now, to talk about your podcast, what was it like for you first, following an author that you love his work? So let's say Ryan Holiday, right? Just like me, you read all 3 of these books and even more. You love what he's writing about. You even implement it in your day-to-day life, and then you just get to sit down and speak with him. What's that like?
Yeah, it's very fulfilling. It's sort of, the circle of life, right? You start off dreaming about having conversations with these people, and then you end up having conversations with them. And so it does feel like it's come full circle in a big way. They're individual coaching sessions for me. I ask a lot of questions that I genuinely want to know the answer to. Part of it is book promotion. It's getting them on and talking about the core principles of their book. But then there's always the opportunity for me to be a little bit selfish and a little bit of a fan, and just ask questions that I want to know the answer to. What's your secret to this? What's your secret to that? What are the books you're reading now that you're not talking about on Instagram? And that's been a lot of fun for me. And I've interviewed a lot of these people, and some of them have also become mentors for me and BookThinkers behind the scenes. I interact with a lot of these people on a regular basis. I've been fortunate enough to fly out and sit down with a lot of these people in person. And so it's very humbling. I'm super grateful for it, and it also fulfills me, as somebody who actually loves this industry.
So are you planning to keep going then with your podcast, or what are you thinking?
I am. Yeah, we'll put 52 more episodes out this year, 52 new conversations with authors about books. I love giving the audience the opportunity to discover a new mentor or discover a new book that could change their life. And there's a lot of potential inside of those pages. And so it's a fun and unique way for me to grow my personal network, for book thinkers to grow our business network. And a lot of these conversations, there's something that happens after the podcast, which is business opportunities become available that weren't previously available.
Yeah.
And having an introductory conversation with these people, that's like a first date, right? You wouldn't ask somebody to marry you on your first date, but have a couple dates with them. Well, now it becomes a little bit more likely that they would say yes. And so we're finding, and this wasn't the original intention, but we're finding a lot of unique ways to collaborate with these people post podcast. And I think that's, it rivals being the most valuable reason for having the podcast for me personally.
Now, Nick, since you're also an entrepreneur, can you just tell people what to expect about the app that you're still trying to take a second shot at?
Yeah, entrepreneurship is very tough and it always takes longer than you would think. And so BookThinkers was originally created because we had this idea for an app that could help readers retain and implement more information from the books they were reading. Simple as that. Plug in your notes, organize them, label them, and make them easier to find in the future, standardized format, and then systematic reminders so that you could retain and implement more information from the books you love. We've put out 2 different versions of the application. Neither one of them has worked. The first version was fantastic, but the company that developed a business, and since we didn't have anybody technical on staff, we just kind of gave up on it. The second version is a little bit more expensive, and it was developed in the US, but we just didn't build it the right way. It was a vitamin, not a painkiller. People didn't really need it. It was missing a lot of core functionality because we tried to just make it a tool instead of social. And so we're now in this 3rd iteration, and we've learned a lot from the first 2 iterations. We did product market surveys, so we want to understand what people value and what people desire. We've surveyed the community, and this 3rd time we're building an application that's going to be pretty sweet. It's going to be more social, so there will be a reason to invite your friends, and there will be an activity feed where you can see what your friends are reading and what they thought about each book, what they're completing, and the badges that they're earning. We've layered a lot of gamification into it. And anyway, overall, just super excited for it. Lessons on entrepreneurship. Like I said, it's tough. I love looking at, again, you have obstacles the way in front of you. I love looking at obstacles and failures as an opportunity to improve and learn and strengthen your offering for the next time. And that's really what we do. So entrepreneurship requires patience and resilience and sort of a love of failure.
Chilling, man. This time I'm really going to be pending to see what app you release, because I wasn't that much aware of it at first, right? But based on what you said now, it sounds exciting, because the more you read, just like I'm doing, maybe if I just read 1 or 2 books, it's easier to just retain and keep going back to. But as you start reading 20, 30, 40, I just can't keep going to all the notes individually through every single book, right? Because just like you, I also love to highlight and circle things. And then what I started to do now is just pass those highlights down to a journal where I write them down by hand, because then I can remember better. And then I start to go back to that journal once a week and try to remember. But as I keep going on, now it's starting to become more difficult. So an app like yours, I can see a gap in the market for it, definitely.
Yeah, and so in this future version of the app, we're going to have pathways. And so when you finish a book, depending on how relevant it was to your life, how much you liked it, how much you need to actually access that information today based on the problems you're having, maybe you want to review that book on a daily basis. Maybe you want to review it on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. You'll get to kind of choose your routine, your pathway. We'll also have that systematic reminder option with diminishing frequency. So you'll get hit a couple times up front, and then the period of time between your reminders to review your notes will start to lengthen. And so over time, you'll be able to retain it using the forgetting curve, which is a really interesting scientific thesis about the diminishing frequency. So yeah, I'm excited for it. And as somebody who reads hundreds and hundreds of these books. Like I want to retain and implement as much as humanly possible. And so I think that this app will take a really good shot at helping people do that.
What are some of your tips that you can give for implementing what you read as soon as you're done reading it?
I have an activity tracker that I use on a daily basis, and I'm now about 3 years into using this activity tracker. It came from the book The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And essentially, you've got Monday through Sunday, so you have your entire week. And then you have each activity that you want to measure and the number of times that you want to hit it that week. And so let's say it's meditation. You know, you just read Stillness is the Key. You want to implement more meditation or mindfulness into your daily life. And you say, I want to hit it 3 times this week. So you put a goal of 3. If you hit it on Monday, you put a little 1 in the box. If you don't hit it Tuesday or Wednesday, you hit it again on Thursday, you put a little 1 in the box. You don't hit it again on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, you can see you only hit 2 out of 3. There's a net of -1. So that shows you that you didn't hit your goal. And now at the end, I have a group of people that I meet with. We call it Success Buddies. And on a weekly basis, we look at, okay, what activities did we not hit on an individual basis? What can we do with that? Or maybe we want to lower our goal if we don't think it's attainable. And so as I'm reading these books, I plug those activities directly into the spreadsheet and I try them out. I measure my activity. I measure how it makes me feel. I have conversations with my friends about those concepts. Maybe they have a recommendation on how I can hit my meditation goal more efficiently based on their past experience with meditation. And so that activity spreadsheet has been game changing for me. It's also, I guess you could call it an accountability group. So that's my number one recommendation is find some like-minded people, state your goals to those people, make yourself externally accountable, and then your efficiency at implementation goes through the roof.
That was great, man. We actually managed to get through every single question that I had. I was worried that we weren't going to be able to make it within the 1 hour mark, but we did it, dude. We did
Perfect. Yeah, there's always a balance between how much do I elaborate and how quick do I answer the question. So I'm happy that it worked out today.
No, it's great. Especially on this show, what I like to do is every single episode when I have a new guest, I want the guest to take the spotlight, right? Because those 45 minutes to an hour, it's all about you, like how you do it, how you think, from which perspective you see everything. So I prefer guests that just take the wheel and speak as much as they want to based on what I asked them. So it was great. But as
Perfect.
we didn't mention it on camera, but we have an ongoing bet. So I'm expecting to see you back on the show soon.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be back soon. Thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate what you're doing and these conversations that you're having. I think it's very, and again, I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm very grateful for it.
Same, man. Thank you really for taking your time being on the show. Before I log you off, Manson, espera que você quede ne episode aqui te ko awo, eta prome biya ko si un international guest, manema bisa, otro simang nos tabay ti un gente local back, un gente ko ta hopi ko no si Naruba, pero mi tabay want number un sorpresa ti otro simang. Si ba gusta episode, please do non like, do non share, y mi tawag vos otro jaluna 8 p.m.